Look at the Sahara from above, and it seems like the most permanent thing on Earth. 9 million square kilometers of sand and rock. An ocean of dunes stretching across a dozen countries. So hostile a sandstorm can bury a road in an afternoon and erase a traveler without a trace. It looks eternal. It looks like it has always been exactly this, and always will be. That is the great illusion of the desert. Because under that sand, and not very far under it, lies the evidence of something almost impossible to believe. The Sahara is not a permanent wasteland. It is a graveyard, and stacked beneath it, layer on layer, are the remains of green worlds full of rivers, animals, and people who watched their world dry up around them. What follows are 6 of the secrets the Sahara is still hiding. Start with the one that rewrites everything else. For most of human history, people assumed the Sahara had always been a desert. Then archaeologists began finding the paintings, deep in the mountains of the central Sahara, at a place called Tassili Nagar, and in the cliffs of the Gilf Kebir near the Egyptian border, there are galleries of ancient rock art, thousands upon thousands of images carved and painted onto stone. And they do not show a desert. They show tall grass and herds of cattle. They show hippos and crocodiles and elephants. In one famous shelter, they show human figures that appear to be swimming. Swimming in the middle of what is now one of the driest places on the planet. The paintings were telling the truth. We now know, with hard scientific certainty, that between roughly 11,000 and 5,000 years ago, the Sahara was green. Not a little greener. Completely transformed. A slow wobble in the Earth's orbit had shifted the path of the African monsoon northward, and the rains came, and the desert filled with lakes and rivers and grassland. This period even has a name. Scientists call it the African Humid Period, or simply the Green Sahara. For thousands of years, generation after generation of people lived here, herding animals, fishing in vast lakes, raising families, in a landscape that looked nothing at all like the sand we see today. The scale of that green world is hard to overstate. In the heart of the desert, where there is now nothing but sand, there was once an inland sea. Lake Megachad, the ancestor of today's shrunken Lake Chad, grew at its peak into a body of water larger than the modern Caspian Sea, the biggest lake on Earth. Fishermen worked its shores. The rock art records the change in stages, an older period full of wild animals and mysterious round-headed human figures, followed by a later period dominated by scenes of people herding great herds of cattle across open grassland. It was one of the largest inhabited landscapes of the ancient world, and almost no one today even knows it existed. And then it ended. The same orbital wobble that had brought the rain slowly reversed. The monsoon retreated south, and the Green Sahara began to die. What makes this the most haunting part is how fast it may have happened. In some regions, the change from grassland to desert unfolded over just a few centuries, within the span of a cultural memory. Real people watched the lakes shrink, and the grass brown, and the animals leave. They were not looking at a slow geological abstraction. They were watching their entire world dry up, and they had to walk away from it, many of them toward a river valley to the east called the Nile. The second secret is what those people left behind when the water vanished, and it is buried so deep that we needed spacecraft to find it. When you look at the Sahara today, you see sand. What you cannot see is that beneath that sand lies the skeleton of an entire drowned river system. In the 1980s, radar instruments flown on the space shuttle were able to peer a few meters down through the dry sand, and what they revealed was staggering. Ancient riverbeds, wide channels carved by water, running for hundreds of kilometers beneath the dunes, completely invisible from the ground. The largest of these ghost rivers has a name. Researchers call it the Tamanrasset. During the Green Sahara, it appears to have been an enormous waterway flowing across what is now the Western Desert. fed by monsoon rains in the highlands, running perhaps 1,200 kilometers toward the Atlantic coast. In its day, it may have been one of the biggest rivers on the entire continent. A green artery of life cutting through a land that is now nothing but sand. Along its buried banks, researchers believe generations of people once lived and fished. The river is gone, but it is not gone from the ground. It is still there, a fossil of moving water, waiting under the dunes for anyone with the right instrument to read it. What makes these buried rivers matter is not just their size. It is what they meant for the people and animals of the Green Sahara. A river is a road. It is a source of food and drink and a line of green through an otherwise hostile land. Researchers now think these ghost waterways acted like corridors, guiding the movement of early humans and animals across the continent during the wet periods, and perhaps even shaping some of the great migrations out of Africa. When the rains failed, the rivers did not carve a new path. They simply stopped, sank into the sand, and were slowly entombed. Today, the water that once flowed on the surface still exists in places as deep, ancient aquifers, the last liquid memory of the rivers that used to run. The third secret is the one you can see from space, and it has attracted more wild theories than almost anything on Earth. In the desert of Mauritania, in the Western Sahara, there is a gigantic bullseye stamped into the ground. A series of concentric rings, ridges of rock circling a central point, nearly 40 kilometers across. It is so large and so perfectly circular that astronauts have used it as a landmark from orbit. It is called the Richat Structure, though most people know it by a more evocative name, the Eye of the Sahara. Because of its size and its rings, the eye has become a magnet for a very specific claim, that it is the remains of Atlantis, the lost city described by Plato, complete with its circular canals. And here, honesty matters, because this is exactly the kind of place where a good story runs away from the facts. The geological evidence is clear, and in its own way, just as remarkable as any legend. The Richat Structure is not a city. It is a deeply eroded dome, a place where layers of ancient rock were pushed up into a blister and then slowly worn down over millions of years, leaving these hard rings exposed like the contours on a map. No harbors, no temples, no canals. What the rings actually record is time on a scale the human mind can barely hold. Layers of sedimentary rock, some of them laid down when this region sat at the bottom of ancient seas, were slowly domed upward by forces deep in the earth. Then they were carved back down by wind and water over untold millions of years, leaving the harder bands standing as ridges. Walk across it on the ground and you would hardly notice the pattern at all. It only resolves into a perfect eye from high above, which is why it stayed a secret until we could finally look down on our own planet from space. And near its edges lie the beds of long-dead lakes, quiet proof that even this stone bullseye once knew water. The fourth secret is a true story that sounds like a legend about 50,000 men who marched into the desert and were never seen again. The ancient Greek historian Herodotus tells us that in the year 525 BC, the Persian king Cambyses II, having conquered Egypt, sent an army of 50,000 soldiers west across the desert. Their mission was to attack and destroy the famous oracle at the Siwa oasis. The army set out from Thebes, reached one oasis along the way, and then marched onward into the open sand towards Siwa. And according to Herodotus, they never arrived. Somewhere out in the western desert, a colossal sandstorm rose up and buried the entire army where it stood. All 50,000 men swallowed by the Sahara in a single day. The search for the lost army has drawn some remarkable characters into the desert. In the 1930s, a Hungarian explorer named Laszlo Almazy, the real man who inspired the film The English Patient, hunted these sands for traces of both the Green Sahara and the vanished Persians. Decades later, in the early 2000s, two Italian brothers announced they had finally found the army's remains near the Egyptian border, weapons and bones and jewelry pressed against a rock shelter. The claim made headlines around the world, and then the doubts arrived. Other archaeologists questioned the evidence and the way it had been gathered, and the find was never fully accepted. Some researchers now suspect the whole legend may be a distortion, that a real disaster in the desert was later exaggerated into a tidy story of divine punishment. For centuries, the lost army of Cambyses was treated as a fable, a moralizing tale about the arrogance of kings. Then people started looking. Explorers and archaeologists have combed the western Egyptian desert for any trace. And over the years, there have been tantalizing possibilities. Scatters of ancient bones, bronze weapons, and artifacts turning up in the sands. Some of these finds have been dramatic, and some have been disputed and remain unproven. No one has yet produced the undeniable graveyard of an entire army. But the desert is vast, and it hides its dead well, and the story remains one of the great unsolved mysteries of the ancient world. The fifth secret is the one that should make us most uneasy, because it is not about a green paradise or a natural wonder. It is about a civilization that tried to beat the desert at its own game and lost. In the harsh Fezzan region of what is now southern Libya, more than 2,000 years ago, a people called the Garamantes built something that should not have been possible. In the middle of the desert, they built cities. They farmed. They grew wheat and dates and raised livestock. They traded across the Sahara, connecting the Mediterranean world to the lands beyond. And they did it in one of the driest places on Earth. Their secret was water, and their engineering was extraordinary. The Garamantes had discovered that beneath the sand lay vast reserves of ancient groundwater, water that had soaked into the rock back during the wetter periods of the past. To reach it, they dug a network of underground tunnels called fagaras, sloping gently downward for kilometers to tap the buried water and carry it by gravity to their fields. It was a brilliant system, and it built an empire in the sand. But it had a fatal flaw. The water they were using was fossil water, laid down long ago and not being replaced. They were spending a savings account that could never be refilled. And over the centuries, as the water table dropped further and further out of reach, their tunnels ran dry, their fields failed, and their civilization withered away into the desert that had never really let them in. For a long time, the Garamantes were dismissed as little more than desert bandits, a footnote in Roman accounts of the frontier. Satellite images and modern excavations have rewritten that picture completely. From orbit, archaeologists have identified the traces of dozens of their mud brick towns, forts, and field systems scattered across the Libyan desert, along with hundreds of kilometers of their underground water channels. This was not a scattering of tents. It was the first true state to rise in the Sahara, an organized society that flourished for around 1,000 years on water. It was quietly draining from beneath the sand. Their rise and their fall are a single lesson written large. A civilization can be brilliant and organized and still doom itself simply by using a resource faster than it can ever come back. Sixth and final secret takes us deeper than any human story, into a time when the Sahara was not just green, but underwater. If you travel to a valley in the Egyptian desert called Wadi al-Hitan, the Valley of the Whales, you will find something that seems to make no sense at all. Scattered across the sand, hundreds of kilometers from the nearest sea, are the fossilized skeletons of ancient whales. Enormous creatures, some of them tens of meters long, lying in the middle of one of the most arid places on the planet. Because around 40 million years ago, this part of the Sahara was the floor of a warm, shallow ocean. The whales of this valley are not quite like the whales alive today. Many of them belong to a creature called Spinosaurus, an early whale that still carried small back legs, complete with feet and toes. A living snapshot of the moment land animals were finishing their long return to the sea. To stand in that dry valley and see the spine of a 50-foot ocean predator lying in the dunes is to feel deep time press against you. The sand you are standing on was once the seabed, and the silence was once the sound of waves. And the whales are only the beginning. Elsewhere in the Sahara, in rock beds that date back over 90 million years, paleontologists have uncovered the remains of a lost world of river monsters. Giant crocodiles longer than a bus, flying reptiles with enormous wingspans, and Spinosaurus, a predatory dinosaur bigger than Tyrannosaurus rex, that appears to have hunted in a vast system of rivers and swamps that once covered the region. Layer beneath layer, the Sahara records a stack of vanished worlds. An ocean, a dinosaur river delta, a green savanna full of people, each one lush, each one teeming with life, and each one now buried under the same silent sand. So put the 6 of them together and the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Rock art of a green world with swimmers and cattle. A giant river flowing beneath the dunes. A stone eye ringed like a target and mistaken for a lost city. An army of 50,000 swallowed in an afternoon. A clever civilization that drained its own hidden ocean and died. And whales lying in the sand where a sea used to be. The Sahara is not one place. It is a stack of graveyards, and the desert we see is only the most recent layer on top. But there is a reason this should feel like more than a collection of curiosities. And it is the same reason that quietly connects almost every one of these stories. The Green Sahara did not die because of anything mysterious. It died because the climate shifted. Slowly at first and then quickly, and a livable world became an unlivable one within the memory of the people who lived through it. The Garamantes did not fall to an enemy army. They fell because they used up the water beneath their feet faster than nature could ever replace it. These are not just ancient puzzles. They are case studies, written into the rock, of exactly how a green and confident world can turn to dust. We tend to think of the Sahara as the definition of permanence, the ultimate symbol of a dead and unchanging place. The truth is almost the opposite. The Sahara is one of the most dramatic examples we have of how fast a living landscape can change, how completely water can arrive and then abandon a place, and how thin the line really is between a world full of rivers and a world full of sand. The people who painted themselves swimming did not think their green world would ever end. It is still down there, under the dunes, waiting. And the only real question the Sahara leaves us with is not what it is hiding. It is whether we are paying attention to what it is trying to tell us.